accomplish together to secure Florida's future by creating an environment where Floridians of all ages have the tools they need to succeed. But our work is not done.
Now at 7, Governor Rick Scott delivers his final State of the State address to a joint session of the Florida legislature today, laying out his legislative priorities before the end of his term. On that list of priorities, tax cuts, funding for the opioid fight, and protection for the victims of sexual harassment.
Scott also reflected on the state's recovery after Hurricane Irma and pursuing the death penalty for people who kill law enforcement officers.
Let's play some more of what the governor had to say.
I'm honored to deliver my final State of the State address today. There were naysayers who told us that there was no way that a businessman with no experience in politics or government could possibly be successful at helping turn Florida's economy around. Fortunately for all of us, the naysayers were wrong. In 2010, when I ran for governor, I promised to change the status quo and create an environment where businesses can succeed and create jobs after jobs for Florida families. The results speak for themselves. Working together, we've created an environment where our private sector has added nearly 1.5 million jobs.
Joining us now to break it all down, CBS 4's Jim DeFede. Good to see you, Jim. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
We just heard from the governor. Jobs, jobs, jobs. And that has been his mantra since taking office. He was all about jobs. He was going to be the jobs governor. Some people, though, his critics say that he has neglected other areas.
Well, let's also talk about jobs for a second, because it's not just the number of jobs he created. He likes to stress on the numbers. It's also the types of jobs. And one of the things that his critics point to is that wages, while jobs have increased, wages have actually gone down. So the types of jobs he's brought into the state have been low-paying jobs. They've not dealt as well. But to your other point, yes, there are other areas that people feel that he neglected. For instance, he killed high-speed rail. He rejected Medicaid expansion, which left almost 1 million people without health insurance in Florida. And again, going back to the issue of jobs, in about half of Florida counties, the rural counties, you ended up having jobs, actually the number of jobs going down. So it's a mixed blessing. You know, he likes to point to statistics, but statistics can always be used to tell a story you want to tell.
Jim, right now sexual harassment is a big topic in Tallahassee. Let's listen to what the governor had to say about that. I guess we don't have it, but the governor did address this issue, which is ongoing.
Yeah, he said what he basically did is he pointed to the legislature and he said, you know, this is an issue that's going on across the country. It's happening here in Tallahassee, and it has to be dealt with here in this building. We have seen in Tallahassee a number of incidents, whether it was State Senator Jack Latvala, who, you know, had a terrible record when it came to that and ended up having to resign. You've had other issues that have come up in Tallahassee. And so, you know, his point is that we have to sort of do something to regain the public trust. Clearly, the public wants better out of their legislators, not a lower standard. They want to hold them to a higher standard.
All right, let's talk about Governor Scott proposing a constitutional amendment that would require 2/3 of the legislature to vote on increasing taxes in the future. What does this mean? What's the significance of it?
Well, the significance of it is, you know, this would be a radical proposal. It would essentially, you know, prevent the state realistically from ever raising taxes again. Now, that's very appealing, but the question becomes, do you want to tie the state's hands in that sort of way? A lot of people will say yes. A lot of people will say people have to live within their means, but you can never anticipate things. And when you write things into the state constitution, they are there forever. So this will be an interesting thing. And I have to sort of also wonder if part of this in proposing this constitutional amendment is driving conservative voting base out in November 2018, when perhaps Governor Scott's name is back on the ballot in a different sort of way.
For a different office.
For a different office.
Everybody seems to think that he is going to challenge Senator Bill Nelson. When do you think we'll expect to hear whether he will or not?
I think he'll have to make that decision right after the legislative session. I think you're seeing a lot of candidates wait until after the 60-day session. Richard Corcoran, the House Speaker, says he'll decide about or announce his plans for governor after the session. I think the same thing with Governor Scott. Look, Governor Scott has a very interesting role going forward here that he has to sort of walk, because the problems that he has is he is very closely tied to Donald Trump. And so if 2018 is a wave election, as some people think it will be, Does he want to run in that sort of an onslaught where it will essentially be almost Donald Trump as a referendum? You saw Rick Scott, even in this speech, begin to distance himself a little bit from President Trump. And for instance, the way he talked about Puerto Ricans in the speech, talking about how often he's traveled to the island there, how much he's there to help them, how he's trying to make that transition better, knowing full well that Puerto Ricans are very critical of the president right
Absolutely.
now.
And also the initial announcement about drilling possibly off the coast of Florida. Governor Scott was not happy about that either.
Not happy at all about that. But, you know, I have a feeling there could be a little showmanship there, and we could be seeing a little kabuki dance between the governor and the president in which the governor ends up getting some concessions from the president. But that's for another day.
All right, Jim DeFede, thank you very much.